In today's video, we're taking a look at the color range mask built into ON1 Photo RAW. This is an extremely powerful tool that's really easy to use, but it gives you, the photographer or the editor, a lot of flexibility in the post-production process to really make your images pop the way that you want them to. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can use it on our images. All right, so here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW. And before we get started, you can download this image using the link in the description box below. I do recommend that you use your own image, however, because that's how you're going to get the most value out of understanding the way that the tools work. But if you would like to follow along with what I'm doing, then by all means, go ahead and get this image so that way you can do so. With that being said, we are going to skip past develop for today's tutorial. You could use develop if you wanted to with the color range mask, but I want to show you the power and flexibility that we have with adding a color range mask. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right over to local, and then I'm going to add an adjustment. And this is going to be the same for everyone on your image, as well as working inside of the tutorial that I'm doing here if you're following along. And you can leave the negative exposure at first, but I'm going to recommend that you change that here in a little bit. Now, to activate the mask, and I do recommend that you always create your mask before you make adjustments to the adjustment slider here, or the adjustment panel. But to make your actual color range mask, what we're going to do is come up to masking and hover over it. Now, I have ON1 set up a little bit differently, so if you do not have the masking option in the right column, you probably are going to get a pop-up window when you click on the actual mask icon. So if you click on it, you'll get a little pop-up window that says properties, all right? And it'll have blending, masking, and text. I just personally like to keep mine in the right column. Makes it easier for tutorials, as well as I'm always able to go to the exact place where I know that it is. That being said, when you hover over masking, you're going to get an option down here at the bottom that says color range. Now, your accent color may be different than mine, but I'm going to click on this blue circle and it's going to activate my color range mask. Now, by default, it has this salmon looking color that ON1 is going to try to select, but we can change that, and that's the beauty of working with a color range mask. To change it, we can click this color picker or this eyedropper and then hover over the image in an area that we want to start working in. Now, the first color that comes to mind in this image is the red, because it is just very, very prominent. So I'm just going to hover over the red and then click, and now I've selected the red. And with this negative exposure, I actually like the contrast that I'm getting with the darker red, but it's going all over the image. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this is impacting the mask. So we're going to hit the letter O, and I do recommend that you use your grayscale overlay versus the red overlay. When you hit the letter O, it's going to bring up your masking overlay. And if you are not seeing the grayscale overlay, what you'll need to do is come down to the bottom of ON1, click this little drop down arrow next to the masking overlay activation button, and you'll see three options. I have grayscale selected. You likely will have red overlay selected if that's all that you're seeing, but grayscale helps you really hone in to figure out where those colors are coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and click on grayscale overlay, and now we need to refine this because it's going literally all over the image, and it's not really in those areas that are just red. Like we can see there's some red in this door. You may even call this little archway over here red. There's red back here, and all over the place. But these little, what are these? These little incense that are burning are not red. They're more brown, but we're going to fix that. So we'll come back to our masking properties, and then we will come back to color range, and you'll see this little slider here. Now, if we pull this to the right, it's going to widen our range or the search, because essentially what we're telling ON1 to do is I want you to consider more things in this image to be similar or more like this red. So the more you pull this to the right, the more it's going to select in the image, all the way until it selects the entire image, and vice versa. If you pull it to the left, it's going to select less, because it's saying in order to make this selection, you have to be as close, or you have to be more similar to this red color than not. All right. So the further you pull this down, the more you are getting this color exactly selected. As you can see, because we sampled on the door, and that's a more rich and vibrant red than the rest of the image, it's going to select this door or this area and things that are more similar to this area the further down we come on this scale, all the way until we get down to 1, and you can see it just barely selects that color overall. Now, let's talk about the best way of making selections in here. So it's going to be very subjective, but what I really want to do in this image is I want to make this like a more contrasty image. And because this is a raw file, I have a lot of data that I can use to really get that contrast and get some depth in the overall shot. All right, so that's what we're going to try to do here with our color range mask. So with a negative exposure, I think that by bringing down the reds to make them a little bit darker does work well. So what I need to do is now find that blend on the photo. So after you have used your overlay to kind of get it roughly where you want, I'll say 80% of where you want this mask to be, I recommend turning off the overlay and then fine tuning it by eye with your adjustment. Now, if you haven't made an adjustment like we have here, then go ahead and make an adjustment so you can see what impacts it's having on the image. So if I just go ahead and pull down on this exposure, you can see I'm getting a more deeper, more, we'll call it contrasted photo, where there's a really, really bright spot and then there's really, really dark parts of the overall image. So that works out pretty well. And so I can go ahead and leave that alone. Now, what I'm noticing is there's some harsher transitions happening across the entire image. And whenever you start working with light and the color range mask, it just doesn't quite work that way. All right. We're not going to have these stark gradations in especially negative exposure in real life when we see it. All right. And you can kind of sense that by looking at this image. So to mitigate that, what you'll do is you'll come back to your masking and you can come over to feather. And what feather does, I'll hit the letter O. As I pull this up, you'll see it kind of adds like a blur over the entire image, or at least over those transition points where the mask is being applied. And this helps with blending a look into the image. So if I hit the letter O again, and I'll turn it off, or bring the feather down, I should say. And then as I bring the feather up, you'll see, especially in this area with the smoke and the light, you'll see how it just diffuses that overall contrasted look, and it gives the photo a more professional, polished look. And, you know, you could go too far and it doesn't look good at all, but you got to kind of play with this and find what the sweet spot is for your image. Again, this is the reason why I encourage that you use your own images. Now, I think that's all you will ever really need to do. But occasionally, you may, and I say occasionally and may very, very strongly, I'll hit the letter O, you may need to work on the transition between the most selected area and the least selected areas. And that's where levels comes in. And this is all trial and error, and again, subjective to the image that you're working on. But for this image, if I needed to make the transition a little bit more stark, if you will, I would take this center node and pull it to the right. And you notice that I'm starting to get more black in areas where there was white. which means that the transition did happen in that area, and it's going to transition a lot faster. Now, again, this is where feathering comes into play to help with that overall transition. So you got to kind of play around with that. Now, for this particular image, I don't think that I needed to move around with the levels. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click that to reset the levels and find a happy place for this particular adjustment on the reds with my feather. Now, the reason that this particular effect works well, let me rename this really quickly. So I went ahead and renamed this to Reds Adjustment, and I recommend that everyone does that with their particular edits because you can get 5 or 10 of these local adjustments based off of colors, and you want to make sure that you know what you've actually adjusted. You also may have 2 different types of reds that you want to adjust, so you may want to label one dark reds and another one bright reds, whatever it may be. Always rename your adjustments. All right, now what makes this so powerful is the fact that you're not only able to manipulate the exposure of the color, but what you can also do is come down and work with the saturation independent of the rest of the image in those areas that you just darken. So maybe we want to boost the vibrance of this red, and maybe we want to pull down on the saturation to get a more muted red look than the rest of the image. And perhaps in the reds, there's something that could be increased structurally. So you can pull up on the structure and make it just kind of pop a little bit more in the image overall. And then of course, if you want it to, you can also use contrast and look at how that's really impacting this image. And again, it's making the darker areas dark, but the brighter areas bright. And it's only working in those areas where you see white or gray on the image. I am not impacting at all the areas that are black. So I'm getting a lot of control over making this image look a particular way. Now, the last thing that I'll mention here before I continue working with this image to get a final look is you have the ability to use opacity. And this is one of my favorite sliders inside of ON1, no secret there. But you can literally say, okay, here's the original image. And as I pull up on the opacity slider, I can blend not only by selecting the reds in the image, again, here's the overlay, but I can also blend that with the original. So I'm really making some minor adjustments, and this is where the power really lies for the photographer using ON1 Photo RAW, and why I strongly recommend using color range masks in your workflow in just a local adjustment. Now, again, we haven't done anything in develop. So let's say I want to work with the gold looking color in this image. I can hit add adjustment, come over here to the masking, activate it, and then take my color picker and we'll click on something that's gold like so. I'll hit the letter O to get my overlay, and you can see I now have a different selection, obviously because I selected a different color. And all I have to do is come back over to masking, and then I can move my color range mask because I want this to be way more finite. So maybe something like that. I'll turn off my overlay by hitting the letter O or pressing the letter O. But for the gold, I don't think I really want to make a negative exposure. So let's double click that or reset it. And that's what double clicking does. Perhaps all I want to do here is warm up the gold. And, you got to be careful with using the temperature slider in the local adjustments because a lot goes a long way. And because this is already gold, you don't really need a whole lot of that. In fact, let me just go ahead and reset the temperature slider. We'll pull up on the vibrance and push the saturation as well. I don't want this to be like overly done. All right. I just want it to be like, I want to give some good separation between the rest of the image and the gold in the image. And so let's play around with the contrast, see if we can get that to go and maybe even brighten it up. Yeah. Now, overall, that's probably way too much. So what I'm going to do is hit the letter O, just take a look at where it's going. I think I can expand the range a little bit more just after looking at it. So I'll turn off the overlay and expand the range here. I think that that fits for the overall image. And then of course I will want to feather this so it doesn't look so stark. And then I'll just come over to my opacity, pull this all the way down and just pull it up a little bit further. I think that that works out just fine. So let's hit the letter O. Yep. And then what always works well is to turn off an adjustment and then turn it back on. And because I know YouTube compression may not actually show that, I'm just going to pull up the opacity so it's a little bit stronger and then turn it off and turn it back on. And hopefully that's going to come through on the YouTube algorithm. But if not, and you're following along, then you can definitely see the difference with the minor adjustments. And that's the beauty of using the local adjustments with color masking or color range masking. So let's go ahead and rename this. We'll call this gold. And then I'm going to do one more adjustment. And this adjustment is going to be for the reds that are over here under the table, because I want to show you how to refine the mask even further in the event that you only want to work in a particular area, but you still want to use the color range mask to do a better selection in that particular area. So what you'll do is you'll hover over masking, select your color range button. We'll go with the eye picker. I'm going to sample this red that's right underneath here. I think this is like a little table. And I'm going to hit the letter O so I can get my overlay. And then we will hover over masking again, come to color range and just pull that down until I see the area that I want to work with, which is just over here on the left, until I see that turn mostly white. I'm not paying attention to anything that's over here on the right side because to me that's not important, and you'll see why in a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and pull up on my feather just a bit so that way I can really see how this is going to end, and I think that that looks good. So now what I'm going to do is click on the mask itself. I'm going to leave my overlay just like it is, and you definitely want to have your overlay turned on for this part. So I'm going to leave the mask overlay on, and then I'm going to click on it. That's going to activate my masking brush. Now, what's really cool about this is you can erase the rest of the areas that you don't want to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Shift X, get my eraser. I recommend if you have 100% feather, pull it down to something like 20, 14, doesn't matter. Just something that is going to give you a more prominent paint job instead of working with a feather that's at 100%, because we're just trying to get a very drastic erase here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click to erase again, because I don't want the adjustment in these areas. And with that feather of 14, I'm still going to get a pretty good transition because I'm not overly concerned about anything that is outside of this little area under the table. All right, so we'll do something like that, and then I'll make my brush size just a bit smaller, maybe a lot a bit smaller, and just paint away this area here. And I don't have to be perfect. I'm not looking for perfection. Depending on what you're working on, you may need to be a little bit more perfection or more perfect, but for today's purposes, I got what I got and I like it. So I'll hit the letter O, and you'll see that I now only have that area on the left selected. So now what I can do is I can double click to reset the exposure, because that may not be the thing that I want to do, but maybe I want to desaturate it just a little bit more, and we will remove some of the structure. And let's just go ahead and increase just so you can see that I'm isolating that area. Now, that doesn't look the greatest, so we will go ahead and reset all of these adjustments and do something that is going to look much better. All right, So we will pull down on the exposure because I don't think there's anything important in those reds that need to be seen. And that may be good right there. And we can probably even pull down the black point, and we'll pull down on the vibrance and saturation. So now that area is a little bit darker. We could probably do one more color range mask to get these oranges that are in the image. So we'll go ahead and hit add adjustment to add in another adjustment. But before I go too far, let me go ahead and change this. We'll call this red table left there. And then we will come back to this adjustment. I'm going to move a little bit faster because I think you already understand what's happening. And if you don't understand what's happening, leave a comment down below and I will get to it and answer it for you, because I want to know what you think about using the color range mask on your images. And while you're down there, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe if you're new, so you can get more content about ON1 Photo RAW just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the letter O to turn off that overlay, because I am going to work with this without the overlay, because I'm confident that I've already selected everything like I was looking at it before. So I don't need to watch the overlay or refine the overlay after sampling my color. What I really need to do now is figure out what is going on with this light. And if I pull the haze slider down, you can see what's happening there. Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not, but I'll pull it down just a bit, maybe pull back on the exposure, and we'll contrast it. Let's see what the highlights give me. No, not really giving me anything that I want. So maybe just reset that. Not a problem there. And what I'll do is just pull back on that, and we'll come down to the vibrance, maybe warm up the light. Maybe that, yeah, there we go. I like what it's doing with the warmth of the light. And remember, one of the things that you can do, because this is an adjustment, is work with the opacity slider. So this is without any of the adjustment. This is the adjustment at 100%. And this is probably where I would put that adjustment. If you turn it off and turn it on, you can see how it's just changing the light structure up here. We could probably pull back on the highlights up there a little bit, and maybe even pull back on the shadows. Nah, we'll open them up. Yeah, that'll work. So we'll go ahead and rename this, and we will call this lights adjustment. So here's the before image, not looking bad. And here is what we were able to do with a color range mask series or set. Again, you want to rename your color range mask, or at least all of your adjustments, so you know where you left off. But especially when you're working with individual color ranges, you definitely want to work with renaming those layers. With that being said, you could do all kinds of stuff from here. This is probably a great place to start adding in presets to get a overall look, but we won't do that today. If you found value in the video, smash the like button. If you want to learn how to use ON1 Photo RAW, consider signing up for a training call with me. A link for that can be found in the description box below. And of course, if you want to save some money when you shop over at the ON1 website, consider using my coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. It'll save you some money. I make a small commission, but that's at no extra charge to you. I greatly appreciate everyone who uses it. If you got questions, leave it in the comment section. And until the next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.